Welcome to Profit Led, a podcast by and for bootstrapped founders brave or crazy enough to grow a business to profitability with very few resources. Profit Led is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform built to save you from doing the same webinar over and over again, from sales demos to customer onboarding to training. This season, Profit Led's host Melissa Kwan, who is also co-founder and CEO of eWebinar, will walk you step by step through the company's journey to $1 million. Melissa is a 3-time bootstrapper who has spent 13 years building startups. Together with co-host and eWebinar COO Todd Parmley, they will dive into one major topic per episode, sharing war stories, mistakes, and lessons learned as they grew the company to $1 million in annual recurring revenue 36 months after product launch. So buckle up, fellow bootstrappers. It's gonna be one heck of a ride.
Welcome to Profit Led Season 2, the podcast where we talk about our journey to $1 million at eWebinar, bootstrapping the company from day one. Our goal is to give you a window into what it's like to build a company with very little resources. Each episode goes in depth into one major aspect of our journey as we share war stories, mistakes, and lessons learned as we grew the company to $1 million in annual recurring revenue over 36 months. My name is Melissa Kwan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host. I'm here with my co-host, Todd Parmley, eWebinar's COO. Hey, Todd, how's it going?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be here. We haven't done one of these episodes in a little while.
I feel like I've got that intro like nailed now.
That was good. I like it.
It's like one of those like really good days.
Yeah.
That was my radio voice.
It was kind of sexy.
I do like ASMR on the side.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, in the last episode, I just read children's books to adults.
Oh, great.
It's my side hustle. So in the last episode, we talked about taking eWebinar from idea to product launch in 16 months. We talked about the process of doing competitive research and how that helped us spec our V1. How we ended up cutting things down every single week as we got closer to launch to get it out faster so we wouldn't end up with too many features at the start. And we talked about how we define launch ready and what MVP meant to us. So today on episode 7, we're going to talk about how we came up with our business model, which is how we make money, the initial price point, which is what we charge. And, because I think like how you come up with your pricing is a question that I get like all the time. So I wanted to spend some time talking about that. And there are so many different paths that you can take, right? When coming up with a business model, like freemium versus free trial, for example, or usage-based pricing versus fixed. Your business model and pricing model actually ultimately determines your go-to-market strategy, but also your lifestyle. And I think it's important to mention that because I don't think many people think about that. For example, like a sales-led strategy and a product-led strategy will give you two very different lives. And I know this because I had 2 enterprise SaaS companies before eWebinar, and both were sales-led. And that's how I knew that I never want to go back to that path again. And, that eWebinar needed to be product-led. I think a lot of people, when they think about what to charge, they only think about, what is my software? What is my product worth right now? But for me, it was so much more than that because my last startup was an enterprise. I spent a lot of time doing one-on-one sales, going to conferences, and then a lot of customer support for companies that were paying anywhere from $10K to $100K a year. I absolutely hated that life where I was at the beck and call of my customers. Like I remember our largest customer was 15% of our revenue. So anytime they called, like I'm running to the phone, right? Anytime they want a feature, we're trying to do it. Anytime we issue an invoice, I'm scared they're not going to renew. Right. And then, of course, it's never net 30 days. It's like 90 days. But then I'm like scared to chase them. Right. So, as a result of spending really a decade doing that over 2 companies, I wanted a product that could be sold 100% through the internet. No conferences, no sales calls, only chat support. So I knew that our price point coming into eWebinar had to be low so prospects and customers would know they can't be demanding. And I didn't want to sell upmarket because I didn't want companies to start asking for custom features like they did in my last startup. And I wanted a business that was hands-off so I could live my life freely. As you know, I nomad 9 months of the year. And when I looked at business models to mimic, I wanted to be MailChimp, right? Bootstrapped, low price point, self-serve, chat and email support. So I think, Todd, like you and I were pretty much on the same page for wanting to prioritize our lifestyle ahead of work. Is it fair to say that we were both pretty naive when we came up with those guidelines, meaning neither of us had never built a self-serve SaaS before? And at no point were we like, hey, maybe it's going to be 10 times harder than what we did in the past.
Oh my God.
I mean, I don't think most people know this, but selling enterprise, like I really truly think is 10 times easier than like trying to sell someone you never talked to, come in for a trial, put in their credit card, cancel, don't cancel, keep it, don't keep it, over months, right? Because when you're selling one-on-one, you have full control over the sales cycle.
Right.
And you're actually talking to someone, and someone who gives you a large chunk of money is very unlikely to leave, after they've made that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we were naive because we might have been discouraged from the beginning.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, but yeah, we had no idea. We had no idea how hard it was going to be. And at the beginning, we were encouraged because at the beginning it was founder-led sales, right? So we were getting a lot of traction very quickly because it was more of like a enterprise sales-led type approach, right? And and it wasn't till those sort of gave us our first boost. We got to the end of that, and it was like subscribers, right? People finding us on the internet.
Yeah, randos.
Right, randos choosing to sign up for our free trials. And, it was kind of uncharted territory for us.
I mean, do you remember how we came up with our business model? Like, and just for context, like our business model is charging by the number of active webinars. Right. So one topic, like one demo would be an active webinar, and every active webinar would have a recurring schedule. So if you come into our website, eWebinar.com, you come to the demo, you see, you can join on demand or you can pick a session in the next 10 days. Like, so the same demo could run 100 times a month, and that is still considered like one active. So that's just for context for our listeners. Do you remember how we came up with that?
Yeah. I mean, we started with research, right? We just saw what was out there. So, this was around the same time, I think. Yeah. This was around the same time that we were doing the kind of product research as well. So while we were looking at all of the potential competitors, we were also documenting their pricing, right? And their pricing model. Like what was the value, the unit of value that they were selling, right? So, and I mean, the thing we discovered is that, since basically everybody is a live first solution for webinars, right? They might have an automated component, but first and foremost, they're a live webinar platform, right? So they were charging by concurrent attendees, which in the context of a pre-recorded webinar doesn't really make any sense because, like, for example, our demo, and you were just sort of explaining this. We have hundreds of attendees to our demo every month, right? But there's never more than one person in our demo at a time. Sometimes they might be in very rare and never in the same session, right? They might be 5 minutes apart and overlapping, but it's extremely rare. I think I've seen it twice where there were two people in the same session at the same time. So it's just a different approach. So the unit of value becomes the webinar. And when I say webinar, because you have to think in the context of pre-recorded, which is a big mental shift when you're thinking of webinars if you're never really thought much about pre-recorded webinars before. The unit, a webinar is the video basically. So that video can play hundreds, thousands of times in a month, right? And be seen by hundreds of or thousands of attendees. But that's the unit of value. I can scale that one video, right? Make it interactive, add chat to it, and scale it infinitely, not infinitely, but I can scale it dramatically in a way that's not possible with a live webinar. So that became our unit of value, a webinar, a published webinar.
And we came up with our mission fairly early, like when we were coming up with the branding of the company and why we were starting this. And our mission at eWebinar is to give people their time back.
Right.
So when we think about, the value driver, the unit of value and why people sign up for us is like, I'm signing up for this because I want to save time. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to save my burnout. Like, I don't want to do the same demo, same training 10 times a month.
Yeah.
So we were thinking, okay, well, if the value we're giving is people's time back, then one active webinar equals more time. So if you are publishing a second one, that means even more time. If you're doing a third one, it's even more time. So the more time you save, the less you do, then in theory, the more you're willing to pay. Right. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's time even gained. Right. So I remember when we launched our analytics dashboard, which wasn't, we didn't have one when we launched, right? Did we? I don't remember.
I can't remember.
If we did,
I think we did, but we did, but it wasn't
basic,
well designed. Yeah.
We
designed it pretty early.
That's right. But in our later on, when we built the new analytics dashboard, the very thing in the top right corner is like how much time you've gained or saved by hosting that one webinar. Because if you're doing one webinar, like one live webinar a month, that's 1 hour. If you're doing that same 1 hour webinar 100 times a month, you've gained 100 hours. Like they just appeared magically out of nowhere.
Yeah, I like that. We might have to revisit the language, I think, in our our analytics dashboard, because actually, if you think about it, like maybe now, because I'm doing it live, I can do four a month. Right. And that's a lot for a lot of people, right? Like one a week, that's a lot. It takes a lot out of you.
It's a lot.
But if I'm using eWebinar or anything else, right, to replace that, I'm actually only saving 4 hours a month because I was only doing 4 hours a month. But because a person is not there, I have now delivered 100 more hours.
Yes, that's right.
Of webinars, of sessions. So actually, like the time save thing never made complete sense to me, but I went with it because we didn't have a better word. But now that we're having this conversation, I feel like we need to revisit that.
We just need to change one word.
We're actually allowing people to do more. Yeah.
Because it is. It's like instant time. You've just instantly magically gained hundreds of hours.
Yeah. But I think the lesson here is like, we really had to think about, like, we couldn't take inspiration from competitors or like companies in our realm because we weren't offering the same value, because our product does not do any live sessions, 0.
Yeah, right.
So while they can charge by seats or number of concurrent attendees, which is how, their customers would get value, right? The bigger the conference or live stream, the more I want to pay, the more bandwidth it sucks up, which makes a lot of sense. So when you can't compare yourself to a comparable like us, sometimes you have to take a risk, right? And where you start is, how do people get value from my product? And how much are they going to monetarily value that value?
Yeah.
And we took a big risk in doing that because, a lot of startups, advisors, everything you read will tell you simplify, don't do anything out of the ordinary, make sure people understand your pricing page. We did not do any of that because we couldn't.
We couldn't, right?
Yeah.
Wait, we didn't have a choice. There was, it was
like there were products. There were products that like had an automated component, and then they just charge a fixed fee for that because they had a live solution that they were making like money on separately.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So we didn't have a choice. We had no idea. We couldn't. We had to figure out so we weren't entirely just throwing a dart, anywhere. But there was nothing like it.
Yeah. And so our concerns going that route, were, people not being familiar, right? They're used to going to a webinar type product and seeing per seat pricing, per attendee pricing. So we knew that, like, is that going to be a problem? Because they're going to come to our page and be like, well, what does this mean? Why don't they charge per seat? But we can't charge per seat because there's only like a few people in your on-demand or automated session, each time, right? And we definitely built the product so people could run it 24/7. So it could be like the Netflix, right? So we weren't sure people were going to understand it. And, because we didn't have any data or any reference point, right, we had to design a pricing page that was easy to understand, even though people had never seen it before. And that continued to be a challenge, right? Like, and what we didn't know, going into this type of pricing is because we didn't have a product before. We couldn't take into account, what were the different ways that people were going to overuse it, so we lose money. And we ended up learning that later on. And later on, we do have an episode on like pricing mistakes that we made. And this is one of them, is like, we didn't even think about figuring out our own cost per webinar, because we also wanted to make it compelling. So we actually later on changed this, but we started with unlimited attendees.
Right.
Do you remember that? So we wanted to have a competitive edge over other people. So instead of limiting people's concurrent attendees, and we knew that they weren't going to have concurrent attendees, we had all these plans like $50, $100, $150, which is, pretty affordable, but no attendee limits. And so because we expected people to come and have like a few hundred a month, a couple thousand a month or whatever. But we were later to learn that there were certain power users that could spend thousands of dollars on ads every day and pump hundreds of thousands of people into a single webinar. So that's something that we are going to dive into later, but these are just things that we didn't take into account because we didn't even know what kind of users we would have.
Yeah. And in hindsight, it is so obvious. Can you imagine being one of those people who does that kind of business and coming across our pricing page? It was like striking gold. Be like, oh my God, I can put unlimited attendees into this thing. So yeah.
And don't forget, like with every attendee, we've got the confirmation email, maybe one or two reminder emails that we're sending out from our own system, right? Like follow-up emails. We don't have a limit on the number of follow-up emails and how far you can schedule. So, there were all these different ways that you could kind of hack the product to maybe pay less on your CRM, or like not have a CRM, or not have a MailChimp. So all these things we were to, learn later, but lesson learned is like, when you think about your business model, you got to think about the cost of what you're delivering. Like just try, right? Like we figured that out later on by surprise. But I guess in hindsight, we should have been a bit more careful and like asking ourselves what the scenarios could be.
I don't think we really knew. I mean, we adjust. It's like we do with everything. We learn and we adjust as quickly as we possibly can, for anything that's like especially costing us money. So do you remember how we finally settled on a price? Like what did?
Yeah. So on your like research, like spreadsheet that you had made that we talked about last episode.
Right.
I think we also like just looked at all the prices across the board, and, and that was actually really just kind of like chucking something against the wall and to see what sticks. Like we just picked something that we thought we could justify. And this is the advice I give to every person. Like, how do you pick your price point? Well, unless you want to be a cost leader, which is a race to the bottom, you really don't want to be the cheapest, right? Like some people do because that's their strategy. It wasn't ours. I don't recommend it because being cheap also attracts a certain type of customer or user that you might not want to deal with. But also understanding that like in the beginning, you can't be most expensive. However, there is a quality perception to price. See, it's like wine, right?
Yeah.
So you can't be the cheapest because you can't seem to be the crappiest product. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
But you also don't want to be seen as, the kind of race to the bottom cost leader, right? Because that's really hard to keep up. You're always going to be giving discounts. So what we did was we just chose something that we could justify. That wasn't the highest, wasn't the lowest when compared to other solutions. And don't forget, like most other solutions that have an automated feature, even though we're a full product, they have live webinars.
Right.
We don't have live. So we are actually missing a big chunk of product that people are used to. Because what we're telling new people now is don't go live, just go automated for things that you repeat over and over, and use a Zoom, right? Use something else to deliver your live broadcast. We don't do that. So we want to be super niche. And that was the other risk that we weren't sure, how it was going to pan out. Like, are people going to be upset or not sign up because we don't have live, and they're so used to turning their live into a video on a landing page that they gate, right? So we couldn't pick a price point that was too high, because for another product, they were getting, like, in theory, in their minds, twice as much, even though we knew that with our product, they could do a lot more. So I think that was like, I think that the net is like, it's not going to be perfect. Like, whatever price point you picked, it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to make everyone happy, but you have to have conviction that you can justify this price when someone says, why are you pricing it like that?
Yeah. I mean, we did throw a dart, right? But we did have guidelines, right? Not the most expensive, not the cheapest, right? So those were our guiding principles, but ultimately it was our best guess, right? And then the other thing to remember is the product was, it had enough features to be a full webinar product, but it was stripped down. Like, we knew we had a long way to go. So it was also, a question of how do we price it at that point, because it was very good at what it did. But, like, for example, and we talked about this earlier, is earlier today, is that we didn't have a single integration, not one.
Yeah.
Like, so, okay, great. I could use this webinar product, but it can't communicate with my CRM. It can't communicate with my marketing automation software. So, we did a lot of those things very quickly, but we were pricing out of the gate with a fairly stripped down product.
Yeah. And another important distinction. So, the exact price we came up with was $49 at level 1 for, up to 1 webinar, $99 for level 2, and you get 2 to 5 webinars. And then level 3 for 6 to 15 for $199. And then anything over that, you paid like $10 for additional webinar. So you had a 16th webinar, it would be like $10, right? So I knew, being, after spending years in enterprise, and this is a business product, this is a B2B product, it is not a consumer product. So I knew that companies that are revenue generating would not blink an eye if we could solve the problem that we said we're helping solve, which is like, free up your trainer, right? Free up your sales guy, free up your SDR from all this mundane, robotic, Zooms that they're doing all the time, so that they can do more of their other stuff, right? Like, or if you're a founder, like, take this away from your plate so you can just go and live your life like what I could do, right? So I knew that people could pay. And I knew that even without those kind of integrations, that they would pay that kind of money. But we did, from an integrations perspective, like, we did integrate with Zapier pretty quickly, like almost the same week that we launched.
Right.
Yeah. And we also, like, I don't know if you remember this, but we also wanted to copy Slack, right? We wanted to have a fair pricing model.
Oh my God.
Another pricing mistake that we made, but we couldn't. The important thing about choosing your business model and pricing and subscriptions is that, like, you can't easily change this, right? Like, any consultant will be like, test your pricing, change it. It's like, okay, this, like, Mr. or Mrs. Consultant, you have never built a product. Your subscription is completely tied into your product, into the upgrade, downgrade, in-app messaging, email notifications, system emails. Like, you don't just get to change that. So because of that, like, anyone who's, like, thinking about pricing right now or looking at changing pricing, like, just know that, like, these conversations are important, because you can't just, like, swap things out. Like, people get angry about that, right? So we wanted to copy Slack because we were new, and we wanted to show more value, and we wanted to further justify our price. So we actually had a fair pricing model where if you upgraded say if you went from level 1 to level 2, we would charge you prorated for the remaining number of days. But if you went down a level, we would give you unused credit for, the number of days as well. So because we did that, and that was also out of the ordinary, it created a lot of kind of just technological complication that we didn't know we would have. Like, because that happened, we couldn't just implement annual plans. Like, it took us 3 years to introduce that back again. We didn't have annual plans to start with because it was complicated, and we needed to get this out right away.
And again, that's another thing where somebody who's like, oh, wow, I can kind of play this model, right? Like, I can publish and unpublish a webinar as needed, or, I can avoid going up to the next level by going up. So we were giving these minuscule, like, prorated payments and prorated credits over and over again for the same account. So it introduced an enormous amount of complexity on the back end. And like you said, when it came time to change that, you just don't realize how it just sort of becomes sort of like ingrained in your whole system, and it becomes very, very difficult to change your pricing model.
Well, and you're working on other things, right? Like, I would say for the first at least 2.5 years. And, the product's been live for 3.5 years now. For at least 2.5 years, we were just inundated with stuff to do. And it wasn't like optional things. Like, as our product grew, we needed to scale like more, and more people were in chat. So chat was slow. So we needed to, like, there's just all these things that we needed to do that was essential to just the operations of the product. We couldn't revisit the pricing. Right. So, we can, and we will dive into this a lot more in the later episodes about the pricing mistakes. But like, I guess we wanted to be too fair. And in the end, like, you realize if you are fair to a customer, like, and you're charging the amounts that we are, you're talking like tens of dollars, right? Hundreds of dollars at most. So the impact to that one individual business account is actually not big, but to a bootstrap company across hundreds of customers, it's massive. It's actually an extra person on your team that can help you move faster. So another kind of learning as to why, like, your business model in the beginning and your pricing model and subscription is so important. Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads, or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit ewebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode.
Well, okay, let's shift gears a little bit now and talk about freemium versus free trial, because I remember you were adamant about charging from day one, right? From day one, the day the product goes live, you pay for it to use it. And, but you did not want to have a freemium model. Could you just share why that was so important?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even entertain that. And I have personal experience with this, like in my last company, which was an open house check-in product. You walk into an open house, you type your name in an iPad, that goes into a backend, and then automatic follow-up. So we sold that to real estate companies that would give it to the real estate agents as like a perk, right? So that was our product. And we started off pretty bare bones, and it wasn't an enterprise product. We wanted to have an iPad check-in for real estate agents. And that was how Todd and I met as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And everyone's like, well, go freemium and, don't charge until a certain amount, and then everybody will use it. And then that will be free advertising. The Dropbox model. I think Dropbox was like at its peak at the time, and everyone was trying to copy them. And so when we started to do that, I remember like nobody would upgrade or they would try to keep like under the threshold. I forgot what the threshold was. Like, let's say it was like one open house a month or something like that. And then, people always like sign up multiple accounts and cheat the system. And one of my mentors at the time was like, if you're delivering business value, like this is not a consumer product. You're not selling ads for volume of users. If people are using this to make money, you need to charge them, right? So you can make money, so you can have the team. So, and also at the time, like, anyone who has a free product, like either before or right now can identify with this is like, you won't believe the amount of like horrible, like mean support that we would get. Like the less people pay, for some reason, the more demanding and more angry they are. And of course, we're a tech product, so everything is digital. And, and back then I actually had the phone support line going to my cell phone. Can you imagine that?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And so there was just so much of the support on people that weren't paying and no time spent on the people that were. Right. So as soon as, my mentor said that to me, I'm like, you know what, that actually makes a lot of sense. So the best thing we did for my last company was remove freemium. And then what we ended up happening was all the bad support went away. We were left with people who valued our product enough to use it. Yeah. Because a lot of people who weren't paying for it weren't using it. If you don't pay, you don't value it. If you don't use it in your business, in your workflow, it actually doesn't benefit me at all as a company. Because now you have unlimited time, right? So I experienced this shift going from freemium where nobody was using it, bad support, everyone was screaming at me, nobody getting activated, there was no urgency, to people started paying, people were respectful because now they valued it. And the people who valued it, who actually used it, so they were actually giving us the best feedback to make the product even better.
Right, because they were actually using it. And
Yeah, and so within that year in my last company, we broke even, right? And and so I had lived through this, the two different sides of the coin. But then I also, like, as I got, more into startups and, like reading more stories and things like that, I realized like freemium is not a go-to-market strategy. Freemium is a growth strategy if you already know what you're doing or you have a lot of money that you can support the product. Right. And you can also, find a lot of, business products that might have a free version, but the free version is extremely stripped down. You could almost not use it in your business. And there's no support on the free product. Like it is literally just for you to like stick your head in and poke around. Right. So I didn't even entertain it because we are bootstrapped. We were spending a lot. David and I had mentioned this, David and I put in the first check. So it wasn't a choice, but also like we are selling to businesses that make a lot of money. They can pay us $100. I knew that. And I also knew that if they weren't willing to, that it would be indicative of the value we're not delivering.
Yeah. I think
which means we need to go back to the drawing board and fix the product.
Yeah, I think that's a couple of important distinctions that, it's not B2C. That immediately, you don't want business customers who are not willing to pay. You're going to end up with garbage. And then also just, it was very practical being bootstrapped. You just can't afford it, right? You need revenue. But the other thing that is, it's a complex product. Like, what would you strip down, right? If we wanted to add a free level, it becomes very difficult with a complex product, and so it sort of becomes all or nothing. Okay, we could do a freemium model, but we're going to offer almost our entire product, landing pages, emails, the webinar room, and then you're supporting a very complex product with free users, and that's horrible. Right. So, that was another part of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's that thing people say, like, if it's free, you're the product. right? Like
Yeah.
what is the free product that we could even have, right? Like if it is a free product, then we have to be making money off of you in some way. So is it an ad or whatnot? And the thing is, we don't have investors. We don't have a growth rate to chase, right? So it's not like we needed an influx of customers immediately. We wanted the right customer who was going to use it, who would give us feedback, people who would give us case studies. And, because we wanted to charge from day one, we spent probably an extra 6 months on building the product before, like just tightening it up before we let anybody see it. But I think it was a good bet. It was frustrating because it felt like we weren't ever launching, but it was a good bet, and people did start paying from day one.
Yeah.
We did give the first batch of views. Everybody thought like everybody knew they were new. It was like it was not a secret that we were a new product.
Yeah.
And we did launch it to, my immediate network and their friends first. And that's why I was like, doing one-on-one sales. But everybody, I think the first batch got a 60-day free trial.
60 trial. Yeah, that's right.
Instead of, the 14. But part of that was also because we didn't have enough time to integrate Stripe. So we needed more time to integrate the payment solution. We needed to buy ourselves time.
Right.
But, nobody was shocked, by that price. But yeah, and now even like I always advise people like, don't do free betas, alphas. Like it is so hard to convert a free person, a free company. Yeah. Like if you put a beta user, in a position where they are supposed to critique your product, that's what they're going to do. They turn into a peanut gallery.
Yeah, right.
Right. But if you ask them to pay you, they're going to tell you everything that's wrong with it and still go ahead because the one thing you're solving for them is painful enough where they will pay, or they'll leave, and then you have to figure out, new ways to attract them.
Yeah. So, just looking back on what we've been talking about today, right? We set our business model, we set our price, and then we launched. I do remember that 60th day when we had that first batch was pretty exciting. It was a pretty exciting day when we were like,
are people actually going to convert?
Yeah, exactly. We were like sitting, waiting for credit card transactions to process, and they started happening, and it was like, oh my God, like people are willing to pay for this. So that was exciting. But can you remember like after we launched and maybe after that first group, what were you most surprised? Once we got past that first group, what were you most surprised about with our business model and our pricing?
Yeah. So, I think there's multiple things, right? Like how cheap people thought it was.
Yeah.
But also how expensive some people thought it was. Right?
Yeah. Oh my God.
It was both.
Yeah.
It was like polarizing. And, some people that thought it was expensive were comparing us to other solutions that had a live component, but we didn't have a live component, but they weren't comparing how our automated or on-demand feature was significantly better than something else. They were so focused on how we didn't have the thing that we were asking them to give up. But the thing is, we weren't asking them to give it up. We were asking them to do this in addition. So we're fighting for a new budget, right? So they're like, well, this thing, whether it's like a Kajabi or like whatever they're using, says they have an automated feature. So maybe I'll just try that first because I don't want to add $49. And so I was, surprised, but it was like a particular audience, like usually like solo entrepreneurs, consultants, new entrepreneurs, right? That were setting up their business, people that haven't really been revenue generating in their business yet, but they actually ironically want to use our product to revenue generate, but they don't have the money to pay for all these things because they're not just buying us, right? They're also buying their, MailChimp and their HubSpot and, whatever it is that they're paying for. Yeah. So just shocked at like how little people were willing to invest in a solution like ours that was supposed to be revenue generating. But also like some people were like, it's too cheap and I can't convince my company to buy this because they think there's something wrong with it. So now you've got like both sides. And I think the third thing is like, which we anticipated was like how difficult it was to explain the pricing model.
Oh my
Like to
God.
us, it was like, it's a webinar and you pay $49, you go up another, if you publish another
Oh
one,
my
it goes
God.
up a level. And they're like, what do you mean? And then they're
Yeah.
like, what about the credits? Like, how do the credits work?
Oh my
So,
God.
it was just, in hindsight, again, like we knew this, but we went ahead with it anyway. Like there were definitely ways that we could have simplified it, but it stopped them from signing up, I think, until at least they got a response.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was like. That's my answer to that question. What was I most surprised about was because it was so clear to us, our pricing model,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not even talking about like the fair pricing part going up and down. Just the idea of like it's one active webinar, right?
Yeah.
It could like we know what a pre-recorded webinar can do, that it can scale infinitely to all these sessions and people in a month. But that was a completely foreign idea to people. And
it still is.
It still is. It still is. And I think that's when we realized too, right? There's this like mental kind of like leap people need to make. And when they go, oh, I get it. And typically that happens in our demo. That's why like our main call to action on our website is not sign up. Right? Because if people know what an automated webinar is, they're going to come in and sign up. They might watch our demo to see like what we can do differently than other solutions out there. But if they know what a pre-recorded webinar is, they'll just sign up. But for the other people, they're like, I don't even get this.
But that's why we put the time saver on the top.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So they can divide it was specifically so they could take what they're paying and divide it by the number of hours that we delivered for them. It was because we were getting that question so many times.
Yeah, maybe we should add that, like dollars per hour.
Yeah, your subscription divided by this.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Yeah, but then when people would watch the demo, they would have that moment, and then it became much easier for them to understand. But until somebody had that moment, and when you were doing founder-led sales, right? When we were talking to people directly, we could kind of hold their hand over that hump. And we didn't have that anymore. So that became one of our biggest challenges. We were tweaking our pricing page forever.
Yeah. And we couldn't do it a lot because we didn't have a designer anymore. So, and right. Neither did we have the development hours again, like to build a new pricing page. Right. So we were constantly like, is the pricing page not clear? Like, or are people just stupid? Or are we, right. Are we not seeing something? Is there a blind spot? Like, why aren't people understanding this? And only like very recently, like 3.5 years after we rolled out the first version of the website, were we able to have time to redesign the new version of the website. And I think we're getting a lot less of those questions because we also added an FAQ, also very important for kids listening at home. FAQ on the pricing page.
On the pricing page, yes. On the pricing page, directly under the prices.
Yeah. But I think it was like, it goes back to, you have to pick a price point. You have to be able to justify it because I guarantee you, no matter what you choose, someone thinks it's too cheap and someone thinks it's too expensive. And you have to have the conviction to say, well, this is what I'm delivering. And if you don't see the value more than what you're paying, you're not a great customer. And some people will leave anyway. Right. And I totally get that because we have people that will have, a couple hundred people, in a certain webinar, and they'll run it, 50 times, and they have like, 50 of those. So they don't mind paying $500-$600 a month. It's a big company.
Yeah.
But then we've got, a solo founder, just starting out, and, maybe they can't even get traffic to their website. So now their thing is running, 2-3 times a month, or maybe even 0 because they can't get people to it. And that also happens. And we have people saying, like, on the exit survey, like on the cancellation survey, like, I don't think this is expensive, but I just can't get people to my webinar. Right. Which also happens, right? You can't guess those circumstances, but you do have to be able to justify that price.
Right. And when we raised our prices much later, right, part of what we did is we're not really right now interested in those people who don't know how to drive traffic to a landing page, right? We want those solopreneurs who are more experienced, who understand how to get people to the webinar, because that's not a problem we solve, right? That's not a problem we solve. And if they haven't solved that problem, we can't help them, right? And they're not going to stay. And they would blame our product. They'd be like, why aren't more people showing up to my webinar? Like, I don't know. What are you doing?
I know. They're like, I rolled out a webinar and I didn't make a sale. So this is not good for me. I'm like, did you think about revisiting your pitch maybe? Like it's definitely the software.
It's like, oh my God.
It's not about like the money, right? Like when we say like, we don't want certain customers, like we love all customers, right? It's not about like, it's really about serving people that don't drain the hours of the tiny team that we have. And these are concessions that you have to make as a bootstrap company. Is like, I would love to have a product and a price point that serves everybody, because I want to make the money as well. But at some point, like there are some customers that need so much hand-holding because they're not tech savvy, or maybe they're like way too early in their own journey. They don't even really know what they're doing. They're setting up their funnel, but it's way too early for them. And then they have the like highest churn rate, lowest conversion rate, and they're actually sucking up the most of your time. So they're actually diminishing returns for the team. And when we say we want to focus on people that like are more experienced, and it's because we need to spend the little hours that we have, the little like labor that we have, and focus on people that actually give us a return so our team can keep providing this service.
Yeah. And you can see other products that try to cater this crowd, and they have to create a huge training component, massive training component to their product, where they're like basically teaching people how to sell, teaching people how to do all of these things. And there's no way we could do that. There's no way we could do that. So it was better to just make the concession. So we've talked about a lot today, right? We talked about choosing our business model, choosing our pricing model. We talked a little bit about what else? Freemium versus free trial, right? Why we chose to go with a free trial versus freemium. And, kind of, we also just talked about our surprise reactions to things that we were like, oh, we didn't know that.
I'm still surprised by some of those things. They don't really stop, right? This kind of feedback.
No, we keep trying to solve them.
We're just not surprised anymore. That was the earlier surprise.
Right. We're used to it now.
We have new surprises.
Yeah, that's true. So with all that in mind, like do you have a hot take for today's episode?
Yeah, I mean, my hot take, and it's something that we didn't spend a lot of time talking about, but only touched on in the beginning, is like your business model and your price point determines your lifestyle.
Yeah.
So really think about the life you want to live as a founder, like as a company. So again, for example, you're selling enterprise, like your customers are going to be texting you, asking for new features, asking you to come to that conference, asking you to meet in real life, not on Zoom, meet in real life, right? At this conference, you're going to have to go and sell them, right? So, and some people love that. And for some types of products and service, you're charging enough to justify that. And maybe you have team members that will, do that for you. It just wasn't a life that I personally wanted, right? Yeah. So before you really pick, a price point, think about like, which market do you want to serve and what that means for, a day in the life of you as a founder. That's like my hottest take. What's yours?
I mean, I think that I'd never been in a position where I was pricing a product, right? The product roles I'd had were at companies where, it's not worth even going into, but I'd never gone through a pricing exercise, really. The first startup I worked at had a freemium model, and exploded because of that. And they had one unique feature that was so compelling they could charge. So it was super obvious, right? But I was not involved in any of the pricing conversations. So I was just really like someone would say it was too high. I was like, oh my God, Melissa, is it too high? Right. And then I did, you know what I mean? Like I found myself being very, very reactive, right. To be like, and probably the biggest lesson is that, what is it that you always say about peanuts and monkeys? What is it?
If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys.
Exactly right. You pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So it's like a always. higher price can mean a more like invested customer, right? Yeah. Like an That's invested key. Customer, which you want, because then you're going to get valuable feedback. What's actually preventing them from succeeding, rather than the peanut gallery, which is like just chattering at you, asking for features that, it's just like a shotgun being blasted at you. It's like, so that was the biggest surprise for me. The biggest learning is that, higher pricing can be a huge benefit, to your business in a way that I just didn't think about before.
Well, and the thing is, it's like an invested customer uses a product and therefore won't churn.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Or will activate and therefore won't churn, or will even expand, right? If they never use it, like if there's no urgency, there's no, like, actually this brings me back to a memory. Like we started with a 30-day free trial. Do you remember we shortened it to a 14-day and we doubled our conversion?
Right. That's right.
Because we realized 30 was just long enough for people to forget about us and not make a video, not upload a video. And actually, I know a friend's company, shortened it from 14 to 7. Yeah. So to the point where like no one even signs up unless they're actually buying.
Yeah, right. No, I remember I was nervous about that too. It's like how, and it seemed very counterintuitive, and it was like so obvious that it just created some urgency. And it also just kicked out people who were tired, kicking the tires. They had no intention of purchasing, at least not then. Yeah. So,
I think that's a good place to wrap up. If there are particular topics you want us to get into this season, please let me know by connecting with me on LinkedIn. Or if you have any feedback about this podcast, I'd love to hear from you. My name is Melissa Kwan, last name spelled Kwan. And if what we've talked about today resonates with you, subscribe to Profit Led on your favorite podcast app to get notified of new episodes, and join our mailing list by going to profitled.fm. We promise to only share things that you'll actually care about. Thanks for listening to this episode. Bye now.
Thanks for listening to Profit Led. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you will subscribe to the Profit Led podcast and head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of every episode. You can also join our mailing list to be notified of new episodes or when we have interesting products and resources to share. We promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks again for listening. Bye now.